Member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome, Representatives. Good to have you here.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
So give us your take on where we are and what comes next.
Well, I think with the snapback of the sanctions on Iran, the lifting of these waivers on the 5 countries, I think Iran is getting a little bit desperate. I think about 40% of their economy depends on energy, and now they've decided to retaliate in the Straits of Hormuz to stop oil tankers that are not from Iran, and that's what you just saw the other day, and you saw 4 previous to that as well.
Do we have the military capability to do what Secretary Pompeo said we're going to do, which is to protect the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz as well as the Persian Gulf?
We do. It's expensive. We can escort these ships. We had drone aerial surveillance that detected an IRGC vessel putting mines on these boats. We know from an evidentiary standpoint this came from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so I think this provocation is going to continue. Our role there is not to be aggressive in going to war with Iran, but rather defensive, protecting our allies and keeping that commerce open.
What is our ultimate goal here? Is it to get Iran back to the table to negotiate a broader agreement?
Yeah, I think so. And we have what I call 100,000 tons of diplomacy in the Persian Gulf. And I think the ultimate goal is to get them back to the table, to get a better deal than the JCPOA, one that would include better inspections, stopping their nuclear production, and also the ICBM capability.
Do we see any indication they're inclined to do that? Because thus far, all we've heard is we will not come back to the table unless you start taking off some of the sanctions.
I don't think, look, we're talking about the Ayatollah. I don't think he is sincere. I worry about that. I think at the end of the day, they're going to be so cash-starved, and it will starve their terror operations that they have in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, that they'll have to come to the negotiation table, or the people of Iran will rise up against them.
Well, is that part of our goal? Is regime change part of our goal?
I would say regime change, but I think about 80% of the Iranians do not want to live under this oppressive theocracy that they're under. And I've talked to a lot of Iranians in the United States, and they would like to see another form of government rather than the Ayatollah.
Are you concerned we could throw out the baby with the bathwater? In this sense, we had Iran just today announce they're going to up their enrichment of uranium, go beyond, it looks like, what was originally in the JCPOA. Is there a danger here that actually will be driving them back into a nuclear program? Well,
and they're saying this really in response to Europe. Europe either buy our energy or we're going to do this. And so Europe has to choose between Iran and the United States. I think they're going to choose the United States. I do think you're right. We have to be careful. We don't want to go back to a full-blown Iranian nuclear production war.
So you say Europe will ultimately side with the United States in part because we have power through the power of the U.S. dollar and clearing as a practical matter. But what damage could we do to our relations with our Western European allies by really going to the well once too often on these sanctions?
Well, I think we need to work with our allies on this and not just make demands to our allies. I think they have to be a part of this. I think it's in the European best interest to want to bring Iran to the table to get a better deal than the JCPOA.
So there's been talk about potential sanctions on Instex, which is basically the group with which, through Europe, could trade with Iran in terms of goods. Do you support sanctions on that group, then?
I don't think we're there yet. I think that's something on the table that we're looking at. But we have to squeeze Iran to get in a position. I think, again, I think they're getting very desperate. If you look at some of the propaganda they put out, and I don't know if you've seen this picture, that it has, like 10 American and Israeli ships being almost like a Pearl Harbor type scene. That's what they've been pushing out to their people as to what's happening. Obviously, it's not. It's very deceptive.
Desperation sometimes can lead to dangerous results, not just coming to the table and renegotiating things. What is the risk at this point of a real military confrontation in the region? We have the Fifth Fleet there. There's talk about sending some troops as well. Yeah,
and I think, again, they're in a defensive posture to protect our allies, to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. I don't think anyone has the appetite for war, although we do have military plans, obviously contingency plans, in the event that is to happen. I would caution that. Iran is about the size of Iraq and Afghanistan combined, and it would be very, very complicated.
Who's playing a constructive role in the region as far as you're concerned? Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, who's really helping?
I think, honestly, I think Europe could play the biggest role here. Saudi is a traditional enemy. The administration did arm the Saudis recently to protect itself. And the Israelis, obviously, Iran is probably the biggest threat to Israel. They look at Iran as they are the largest state sponsor of terror. And when I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he didn't talk about ISIS. He talked all about Iran.
Fascinating. Okay. Representative Michael McCaul of Texas, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, still with us here on set, Lori Calvasina, RBC Capital Markets head of U.S. equity strategy. I wanted to wrap all of that into volatility conversation. And I have a chart in my Bloomberg that shows the VIX, the MOVE index is that blue line, which is volatility in treasuries, and then FX vol. Is the MOVE a leading indicator, or are we going to go through like different asset classes, different volatility, and sort of have to trade that?
I think volatility is likely to continue picking up. I think it's very difficult for me to sit here and hear all these, layers of policy uncertainty that's emanating out of Washington, whether it's trade, whether it's geopolitical. When we see volatility pick up in Washington policy, or uncertainty pick up, rather, we do tend to see volatility pick up in the stock market itself. We've been very concerned that markets are overvalued, that they're crowded. If we were to get a big pickup in the VIX, I think it could really, inflict some damage quite quickly.
Where? Like, where is positioning crowded the most, where that would be the most significant downside?
Well, it's not directly linked to some of these issues, specifically in the Middle East, but I do think whenever people are de-risking in the U.S. equity market, they sell what they own, and so we tend to see it really happen in the TIMT space. And what's interesting to me, if you look back over the past 6 weeks or so, some of the market's worst days, we've actually seen software stocks, which are really not caught up in any of these geopolitical issues, economic or otherwise, get hit. And it's just a question, I think, of European investors and hedge funds just selling what they own, some of their biggest holdings in the U.S. equity market.
So then to wrap this up with oil, which I know this will be a painful topic for you again. I brought this up for the last couple hours, of the fact that oil's not up on these amazing headlines. Yesterday I was reading the paper, I was like, oh my God, this is extreme, and oil's not moving at all. How do you rationalize it?
Well, I think that at least what I've been hearing from investors over the last couple trading days, it hasn't been, oh my gosh, we got to get into energy stocks because oil might go up. It's still a big focus on what is the demand picture going to look like. And geopolitical tensions, whether it's emanating from trade, whether it's emanating from what's going on in the Middle East, I think it all ties back to what does it do to corporate confidence? Is there eventually a feedback loop on consumer confidence? And that's really what investors are preoccupied with right now. This is just one more thing that we're putting on top of the equity market, that we're putting on top of the investor psyche that's causing things to bend. Hopefully they don't break, but I guess we'll see.
All right, Lori Calvasina of RBC Capital Markets sticking with us. Coming up, the Paris Air Show kicks off today, and the focus on the future of Boeing 737 MAX jets. We're going to speak to an analyst who's there at the air show.